In the schoolyard, they grabbed him roughly. A sudden ambush of 3 against 1, a terrible miscalculation. He swiftly dismantled them all. Ethan Caldwell, a young man of 17, had always gravitated toward the fringes of society, preferring the quiet hum of solitude to the clamorous roar of popularity. His slender build, standing just under 5 feet 7 inches, often led people to underestimate him. He had messy blonde hair that seemed to defy any attempt at taming, and he usually wore faded denim jackets and worn-out sneakers, clothes that spoke of comfort rather than style. After his mother had changed jobs, moving them to Oakhaven Academy halfway through his second year, Ethan had resigned himself to the familiar routine, staying under the radar, navigating the school day with minimal interaction, and avoiding drawing any unwanted attention. Oakhaven Academy, with its sprawling campus and imposing stone buildings, was a microcosm of suburban life, complete with its own intricate social strata and unspoken rules. The classrooms buzzed with academic fervor. The gymnasium echoed with the sounds of bouncing basketballs and cheering crowds, and the courtyards served as stages for the daily dramas of teenage life. For most students, it was a stepping stone to adulthood. For Ethan, it was simply another obstacle to overcome. However, blending into the background proved more challenging than he had anticipated. It began on his 4th day. Ethan was making his way through the crowded corridor between first and second periods when he inadvertently collided with someone emerging from the art room. The someone turned out to be Vincent Sterling, a towering senior with the physique of a football player and a perpetually sour expression that suggested he resented the world. Vincent possessed the kind of swagger that made other students instinctively yield, the kind of guy who thrived on intimidation and control. "Hey, watch it, twerp," Vincent growled, shoving Ethan with enough force to send him staggering backward into a display case filled with student artwork. The shattering glass echoed through the hallway, and several students paused to observe the spectacle, their faces ranging from amusement to concern to quiet relief that they weren't the ones in the spotlight. Ethan mumbled an apology and attempted to slip away, but Vincent wasn't finished. "What did you say your name was, newbie?" "Ethan," he replied softly, adjusting his glasses and avoiding eye contact. "Ethan what?" "Caldwell." Vincent scrutinized him with undisguised contempt. "Well, Ethan Caldwell, here's some friendly advice. Stay out of my line of sight." He emphasized the warning with another shove, this one more forceful than the first, before sauntering away with his 2 inseparable sidekicks, Blake Harrison and Derek Cooper. Blake was Vincent's right-hand man, a lean and wiry kid with a mop of brown hair and a penchant for sarcasm. He had a sharp wit and a talent for finding everyone's vulnerabilities. Derek was the muscle, a hulking figure with a shaved head and a limited vocabulary, the kind who followed orders without question and used his size to intimidate others. As Ethan gathered the scattered pieces of broken glass and apologized to the art teacher, he noticed other students pretending not to notice. A few offered sympathetic glances, but no one offered to help. That was the unspoken code at Oakhaven Academy. Vincent Sterling and his crew were untouchable, and interfering in their affairs was a surefire way to become their next target. Ethan had encountered bullies before, at his previous schools and the ones before that. His father's career as a traveling salesman meant frequent moves, and Ethan had learned that every school had its own set of predators. He'd also learned that retaliating usually made things worse, especially when you were outnumbered and outmatched. It was better to endure it, keep your head down, and hope they'd eventually lose interest and move on to someone else. But what Vincent and his friends didn't realize, what nobody at Oakhaven Academy knew, was that Ethan Caldwell wasn't just another pushover. For the past 9 years, ever since he was 8 years old, Ethan had been practicing Aikido under the guidance of his Aunt Clara, a retired police officer who had dedicated her life to martial arts. Every summer, Every weekend when his father wasn't on the road, Ethan trained. He learned how to use his opponent's weight and momentum against them, how to defend himself without causing serious harm, how to remain calm under pressure. But Aunt Clara had instilled one principle above all others. Martial arts wasn't about aggression or dominance. It was about self-defense, about protecting yourself and others when all other options had been exhausted. The true warrior, Clara would say, is the one who can avoid a fight altogether. So Ethan remained silent when Vincent and his friends initiated their campaign of petty harassment. He didn't react when Blake accidentally spilled his soda on him in the cafeteria, drenching his clothes and prompting a chorus of laughter from the surrounding tables. He swallowed his anger when Derek bumped into him in the hallway hard enough to send him sprawling. He endured Vincent's taunts, the constant stream of insults about his appearance, his clothes, his family's financial struggles, which Vincent had somehow discovered and exploited. The harassment followed a predictable pattern. Mornings were usually safe. Vincent and his crew rarely showed up before second period, but lunch was a gauntlet, and the afternoon hallways were hunting grounds. Ethan learned to take detours, to eat his lunch quickly, and leave the cafeteria before they spotted him, to time his trips to the library when he knew they'd be in class. For 2 weeks, this strategy worked. Ethan maintained his grades, avoided major confrontations, and told himself he just needed to survive until the end of the semester. Then his father would probably get transferred again anyway, and he could start over somewhere else. But Vincent Sterling wasn't satisfied with passive intimidation. He wanted a reaction, wanted to see Ethan break, and his frustration at not getting one made him escalate his tactics. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late September when things took a dangerous turn. Ethan was walking to the gymnasium after 5th period when Vincent appeared suddenly, flanked by Blake and Derek. The hallway was nearly deserted. Most students had already left for the day or were participating in after-school sports. "Caldwell!" Vincent called out, his voice laced with that familiar edge of barely suppressed violence. "We need a word." Ethan's stomach tightened, but he kept walking. "I'm just trying to get to practice, Vincent. I'm not bothering anyone." "That's the problem," Blake interjected, his voice mocking. "You think you're too good for everyone else, don't you? Walking around here like you're invisible." "I don't think that at all," Ethan replied, reaching the gym doors and pushing them open. "I'm just trying to mind my own business." "Your business is our business," Derek grunted, stepping closer. "Vincent's trying to help you fit in here, and you're being ungrateful." Ethan walked through the doors and headed towards the changing rooms. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine." That's when Vincent lost his temper. He grabbed Ethan by the arm and yanked him back, slamming him against the lockers with enough force to dent the metal. "You think you're smart, don't you? Think you can just ignore us and we'll go away?" "I'm not ignoring you," Ethan said, struggling to remain calm. "I just don't want any trouble." "Well, you've got trouble whether you want it or not," Vincent snarled. He grabbed Ethan by the collar and pulled him close enough that Ethan could smell the chewing gum on his breath. "You're going to learn some manners, one way or another." That's when Ethan made his mistake. Maybe it was the culmination of weeks of relentless harassment. Maybe it was the way Vincent's grip was digging into his skin. But something in his expression changed. For just a moment, his carefully constructed facade of passivity crumbled, and Vincent saw something that made his eyes narrow. "What was that look?" Vincent demanded. "You want to do something about it, Caldwell?" "You think you can take me?" "I don't want to fight you, Vincent," Ethan said softly. "I just want to go home." But Vincent had seen that flash of something, defiance perhaps, or just the primal instinct of a cornered animal, and it infuriated him. "You do think you can take me," he said, his voice rising. "Boys, I think our friend here needs a lesson in respect." Blake and Derek moved to surround Ethan, cutting off his escape routes. The hallway suddenly felt claustrophobic. the fluorescent lights overhead casting harsh shadows that made everything seem more threatening. Ethan's training took over automatically. His breathing slowed, his posture shifted slightly to improve his balance, his eyes assessed potential weapons and escape routes. But he didn't move. Not yet. "This is your last chance, Caldwell," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Apologize for disrespecting me, and maybe we'll let you walk away with just a few bruises." Ethan looked at each of them in turn. Vincent with his sneering grin, Blake practically drooling with anticipation, Derek cracking his knuckles like he was preparing for a workout. He thought about Aunt Clara's teachings, about the difference between defense and aggression, about the fine line between necessary force and unnecessary violence. "I'm sorry you feel disrespected," Ethan said carefully. "That wasn't my intention." "Not good enough," Vincent sneered. "Try again, on your knees." That's when Ethan knew the negotiation was over. Vincent wasn't interested in apologies or respect or even submission. He wanted to inflict pain, and Ethan was the nearest target. There would be no walking away from this, no matter what he said or did. "I can't do that, Vincent," Ethan said quietly. "Can't or won't. Both." Vincent's face flushed with anger. "Derek, hold his arms. Blake, grab his legs. Let's see how tough he is when he can't move." They moved swiftly, but Ethan had been anticipating it. Derek charged him first, those massive arms reaching out to engulf him in a bear hug. Ethan ducked low, allowing Derek's momentum to carry him over his back, then spun to face Blake, who was attacking from the side. Blake was faster than Derek, but not as strong, and when he lunged for Ethan's legs, Ethan simply sidestepped and let him crash into the wall. But Vincent was the real threat, and he was already advancing. He came in high, aiming for Ethan's head with a wild swing that had all his weight behind it. Ethan leaned back, letting the punch whiz past his face, then stepped forward into Vincent's guard. For a moment they were close enough to touch, and Ethan could have ended it right there with a strike to a pressure point or a joint lock. Instead, he pushed Vincent away and retreated toward the exit. "I don't want to fight you," he said again. "Just leave me alone." "You little worm," Vincent roared, his face now crimson with humiliation and rage. "You think you're some kind of martial artist? Boys, get him." This time, all three of them attacked at once. Derek recovered first, his thick arms spread wide to block Ethan's escape. Blake came in low, still rubbing his bruised shoulder from his collision with the lockers, but moving with renewed determination. And Vincent charged straight ahead, his hands reaching for Ethan's throat. Ethan evaded Derek's grasp, ducked under Blake's tackle, and caught Vincent's wrists as those hands closed around his neck. For a moment, the four of them were entangled in a strange, violent dance, each testing the other's strength and resolve. Then, Vincent's grip tightened, and Ethan felt his windpipe constrict. The larger boy's thumbs pressed against his Adam's apple, and Ethan's vision began to blur around the edges. He could hear Blake laughing somewhere behind him, could feel Derek's hands grabbing at his arms, trying to restrain them. This was the moment Aunt Clara had prepared him for. Not the techniques or the conditioning, but the decision. The moment when avoiding a fight became impossible, when self-defense became the only recourse. Ethan stopped holding back. He brought his hands up inside Vincent's arms and applied a precise joint lock, breaking the chokehold and sending Vincent stumbling backward. Before Vincent could recover, Ethan spun and delivered a swift strike to Derek's abdomen, doubling the larger boy over and leaving him gasping for air. Blake was still behind him, still laughing, still thinking this was some kind of game. Ethan turned to face him, and Blake's laughter died in his throat. Something had changed in Ethan's demeanor, in the way he moved, in the expression on his face. This wasn't the quiet, unassuming kid they'd been tormenting for weeks. This was someone else entirely. "What the heck?" Blake whispered, taking a step back. Ethan didn't respond. He was done talking. Vincent was recovering from the broken chokehold, shaking his head and preparing to charge again. Derek was still bent over, trying to catch his breath, and Blake was retreating, finally realizing that they'd made a grave error. Vincent came at him again, this time with more caution, but just as much fury. He launched a barrage of punches that would have overwhelmed most kids their age, but Ethan moved between them like a whisper, deflecting what he couldn't avoid and avoiding what he couldn't deflect. When Vincent overextended on a right hook, Ethan trapped his arm and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the lockers. Derek straightened up, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're toast, Caldwell!" he yelled, charging forward with his head down like a bull. Ethan waited until the last moment, then stepped aside and used Derek's momentum to propel him face first into the wall. The impact reverberated through the empty hallway, and Derek slumped to the floor, dazed but not seriously injured. That left Blake, who was now backing away with his hands raised. "Hey man, this is getting out of control. Maybe you should what?" Ethan asked, his voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Maybe you should apologize. Maybe you should have considered that before you decided to gang up on me 3-on-1. Vincent was getting back to his feet, blood trickling from his nose where it had connected with the locker. His eyes were wild with rage and something else, fear perhaps, or just the growing awareness that he'd chosen the wrong target. "This isn't over, Caldwell," he snarled, wiping blood from his face. "You think you're tough because you got lucky? We'll see how tough you are when—" Ethan moved before Vincent could finish the threat. 2 quick steps closed the distance between them, and then Ethan's palm connected with Vincent's chin in a precise strike that Aunt Clara would have applauded. Vincent's eyes glazed over, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with severed strings. The hallway fell silent, except for the sound of Derek groaning as he attempted to push himself up from the floor. Blake stood paralyzed, his mouth agape, staring at his unconscious leader. "Is he dead?" Blake whispered. "He's fine," Ethan replied, checking Vincent's pulse and ensuring his airway was clear. "He'll have a headache when he wakes up, but he's fine." Derek finally managed to stand, swaying slightly but conscious. He looked at Vincent's limp body, then at Ethan, then back at Vincent. What are you?" "I'm just a kid who wants to be left alone," Ethan said. "But I'm also a kid who knows how to defend himself when necessary." "You could have done this the whole time," Blake asked, his voice barely audible. "You could have fought back, but you didn't." Ethan nodded. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I was hoping you'd get bored and find someone else to torment." "But we didn't," Derek said, realization dawning in his eyes. "We kept pushing." "You kept pushing," Ethan agreed. "And when Vincent put his hands around my throat, when you both helped him, that became assault. Self-defense is very clear about what you're allowed to do when someone tries to strangle you." Blake swallowed hard. "Are you going to report us?" Ethan considered this. Vincent was beginning to stir, his eyelids fluttering as consciousness returned. In a few moments he'd be awake and probably angrier than ever, but he'd also be aware, as would Blake and Derek, that the power dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. "That depends," Ethan said finally, "on whether this happens again." Vincent groaned and tried to sit up, one hand pressed to his jaw. When he saw Ethan standing over him, his eyes widened with a mixture of fear and confusion. "What happened?" "You got knocked out," Blake said bluntly. "Fair and square." "By him." Vincent gestured weakly at Ethan, his voice incredulous. "By me," Ethan confirmed. "After you tried to strangle me while your friends held me down." Vincent's face cycled through a range of emotions: confusion, anger, embarrassment, and finally, something that might have been respect. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but remaining upright. "I don't understand," he said. You're nobody, you're nothing." "I'm somebody who knows how to defend myself," Ethan replied calmly. "I'm somebody who chose not to until you forced me to. There's a difference." "You've been holding back this entire time?" I've been trying to avoid precisely this situation, but when you put your hands around my throat, that choice was taken away from me. Vincent touched his jaw gingerly, wincing at the pain. You could have hurt us severely. I could have, Ethan agreed. I chose not to, just as I chose not to fight back all those other times, but that was my decision, not yours to make for me. The four of them stood in the empty hallway, the silence stretching between them like a chasm none of them was sure how to bridge. Finally, Derek spoke up. So what happens now? Ethan looked at each of them in turn. Now you leave me alone. You stop harassing me, you stop looking for excuses to start fights, and you find something better to do with your time. And if we don't? Vincent asked, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. Then next time, I won't hold back, Ethan said simply. Next time, I won't pull my strikes or worry about how badly I injure you. Next time, I'll treat you like the threats you've proven yourselves to be. Vincent stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Understood. Good. Ethan picked up his gym bag and slung it over his shoulder. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. I truly did just want to be left alone. He started walking toward the exit, then paused and glanced back. And Vincent, if I hear about you three bullying anyone else, anyone at all, we're going to have another conversation. And it won't be as pleasant as this one. The following day, news of the altercation had spread through Oakhaven Academy like a brush fire. The details became more embellished with each retelling. Ethan had single-handedly defeated all three of them. Ethan was secretly a martial arts expert. Ethan was connected to a secret organization. Ethan was an undercover agent. The truth was more ordinary, but no less impactful. The quiet new kid had defended himself and prevailed. Vincent, Blake, and Derek kept their distance, nursing their bruises and their wounded egos. They didn't apologize, but they didn't cause any further problems either. Other students began to acknowledge Ethan in the hallways, to include him in conversations, to treat him like he'd earned his place at Oakhaven Academy. But the most significant transformation was within Ethan himself. He walked with more confidence, spoke more assertively, and no longer spent his days looking over his shoulder. He'd learned that sometimes, despite your best efforts to avoid conflict, you have to stand up and fight. And when that moment arrives, you better be ready. Aunt Clara had been right about one thing. The true warrior was the one who could avoid a fight altogether. But she'd been wrong about something else. Sometimes, proving it was precisely what you needed to do. Character count, 2001-76. Transformed count, 21279.